What made Jin smile that wide? Why was J-Hope clapping like a child seeing fireworks for the first time? And what made the usually composed RM laugh with his whole body as if he had been waiting for this moment forever? It wasn't just a stage. It wasn't just a performance. It was pure magic, and the kind that only Jungkook could create. But even more magical was the way BTS reacted. On a night filled with lights, cheers, and the thunder of ARMY's voices echoing across the venue, there was one sound that stood out. The sound of BTS laughing, cheering, and celebrating like they were seeing their youngest brother on stage for the first time. Jin was glowing. There's no other word for it. His eyes crinkled with joy, his laughter booming every time Jungkook hit a note or pulled off a dance move so effortlessly, it seemed inhuman. He didn't just clap. He stood, he pointed, he laughed with tears in his eyes. Was this the same Jin who used to tease Jungkook during their early trainee days? That night, he looked like the proudest older brother in the universe. And he wasn't alone. Taehyung was swaying side to side, his boxy smile never leaving his face. Jimin, sitting beside him, clutched his heart and yelled out, "Let's go, Jungkookie," in a tone that cracked with emotion. Suga, usually calm and reserved, was tapping his foot furiously and grinning like a child at Disneyland. Even RM, always the leader, always composed, couldn't stop smiling, shaking his head in disbelief, whispering, "He's too good. He's just too good." What was it about this performance that brought so much happiness to BTS? Why did they look like fans again, screaming, laughing, nearly jumping out of their seats? Because this moment wasn't just about Jungkook's performance. It was about watching someone they loved doing what he was born to do. This was joy. Unfiltered, unstoppable, undeniable joy. You could see it in every reaction. Every eye sparkled. Every voice was raised. And every single BTS member became something they hadn't been in a long time. Just brothers in the crowd, cheering with every fiber of their being. The happiness was real. The love was loud. And the pride was overwhelming. But this is just the beginning. What Jungkook did next would take that joy and transform it into something that none of them were ready for. Just when the crowd thought Jungkook had reached the peak of his performance, something happened. Something that no one saw coming. In the middle of the spotlight, with millions watching live and countless more streaming online, Jungkook paused, just for a heartbeat, and in that single, frozen moment, he turned his gaze toward a specific corner of the arena, where his 6 brothers were sitting. It was subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. The second his eyes met theirs, the atmosphere shifted. Jin literally gasped, clapping his hands over his mouth in disbelief. J-Hope stood up, spinning in a small circle, unable to contain the flood of joy bursting from within him. Jimin grabbed Taehyung's arm and shouted something inaudible, but from the way they both laughed through tears, it wasn't hard to guess. "He's doing this for us." And he was. Jungkook smiled. Not the confident, charismatic smile he gave the cameras or the audience. No, this was the soft, pure, childlike smile he used to wear in the BTS dorm kitchen at 2 a.m., joking with Jin over Ramyeon and songs that it was a smile only BTS would recognize. He pointed, not obviously, not to the general crowd, but gently, subtly, right toward their section. As if to say, "This is for you." And BTS lost it. Namjoon doubled over, hands on his knees, laughing like he hadn't laughed in years. Yoongi leaned forward, one hand over his chest, his eyes glistening. It was clear that in this moment, they weren't watching Jungkook, the global star. They were watching Jungkook, their brother, the boy who once stood in front of them at rehearsals, begging for feedback, trying to prove himself. Now, he didn't need to prove anything. He was the performance. The audience, unaware of the subtle exchange, continued cheering. But to BTS, that tiny gesture, that look, that point, that smile, it was everything because they knew exactly what it meant and it meant. "Thank you for believing in me." Jin wiped his eyes. And even though the cameras didn't show it clearly, ARMY fans with front row seats did. They caught the way Jin leaned in toward RM and said, "He really made it." And RM nodded. He always had it in him. They weren't just proud, they were overwhelmed with happiness. This wasn't the pride of artists watching another artist. This was family watching someone they love shine in full bloom. And then, Jungkook did something else. He stepped forward. The music shifted. The crowd sensed a change in energy, but only BTS understood what was about to happen, because the next song wasn't just any song. It was their song point one that held memories, laughter, midnight tears, and promises whispered before sleep. One that BTS hadn't performed together in years. And now, Jungkook was singing it solo, not just for the fans, but especially for them. He raised the mic. The first note echoed. And in the stands, Jin's voice cracked as he sang along. This wasn't just a concert. It was a reunion of souls, and no one, not even the most stoic army, could hold back their tears. The first few notes echoed through the venue like a heartbeat, slow, soft, familiar, and then came the words, tender, trembling, nostalgic. Jungkook's voice wasn't just performing. It was remembering, telling a story, revisiting a past that only 7 people in the entire world fully understood. And the second the lyrics filled the air, every BTS member froze. The words fell like snow, gentle, beautiful, and cold with memory. Jin's eyes welled up instantly. Not from sadness, but from a flood of emotions too big for words. He turned his face slightly, trying to hide the tears that escaped, but there was no hiding in a moment like this. Because Jungkook wasn't just singing about missing someone. He was singing to them, T.O. the members, T.O. the days in the cramped dorm, the laughter, the sleepless nights, the ramen they shared, the endless rehearsals, the injuries, the awards, the moments they held each other and promised not to give up. And now, Jungkook stood on the grandest stage, singing to the very people who once gave him the strength to keep going. Jimin couldn't hold back. He stood, hands covering his mouth, shaking his head with disbelief and raw affection. He mouthed the lyrics silently, tears dripping from his chin. Behind him, V closed his eyes, and for a second, he looked like the 18-year-old boy he once was. Waiting backstage with Jungkook before their first major show, Suga didn't move much, but the way he gripped the edge of his seat said everything. His lips were tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes unblinking as if afraid he'd miss even 1 second. Yoongi rarely showed emotion in public, but that night he didn't need to say a word. His heart was on his sleeve. J-Hope was swaying gently, his hands clasped together in front of his face, his eyes shimmering like stars. And Namjoon, Namjoon, the leader who always carried everyone. Tonight he looked small, soft, vulnerable, and utterly proud. He whispered under his breath, "You did it, Kook. You really did it." But the most heart-shattering reaction came from Jin. As Jungkook reached the chorus, the camera happened to catch him, standing now, hand pressed tightly to his chest, his face streaked with silent tears. This was the man who once carried the weight of being the eldest, the protector, the cheerful one who laughed when others cried. And now, all he could do was cry out of joy, because the boy he once guided was now guiding millions with his voice. And Jungkook knew he wasn't just singing Spring Day, he was singing, "I still carry you in my heart." The audience started to realize something special was happening. Armies held their breath, the stadium falling into a sacred silence. Phones were lowered, eyes were fixed, because no one wanted to break the spell. IT wasn't just a performance anymore. IT was a letter, a love letter written in melody and memory, from Jungkook to BTS. And BTS, they received it with open arms and open hearts. As the final note faded, the stadium erupted in screams. But for one more beat, just one more, there was silence among the 7, a silence filled with love, with gratitude, with unspoken words finally heard. Then Jin did something unexpected. He raised both arms and made a heart, a huge, ridiculous, full-arm heart, just like the ones he used to make in their early debut interviews. The crowd laughed. Jungkook saw it and cracked a bright, glowing smile, and just like that, the moment broke and happiness poured in again. The roar of applause filled the stadium, like a thunderstorm of love crashing over every corner of the venue. But while fans screamed, cheered, and waved their army bombs, the real storm was happening in the front row, where 6 men were barely holding themselves together. And then Jungkook did something no one expected. He didn't bow and exit like usual. He didn't thank the crowd and moved to the next performance like a scripted concert flow. No. He did something far more honest, far more raw. He started walking, off stage, down the stairs, toward them. The cheers dimmed into a collective gasp. Even the other members, who knew Jungkook better than anyone, froze. It took them a full 5 seconds to realize what was happening. Jungkook was walking directly toward their section, still holding the mic, still bathed in stage lights, but now stepping down to stand with them. And when he reached them, he didn't say a word. He just opened his arms, and Jean, still red-eyed, still smiling like the world had finally made sense, stood up and walked straight into them. They hugged. Tight. Fierce. Like brothers reunited after war. The crowd exploded. Jungkook buried his face in Jin's shoulder. Jean patted his back over and over, murmuring something that couldn't be heard through the mic, but every fan in the world knew what it meant. You did so well, Jungkook. I'm so proud of you. Seconds later, the rest of the members surged forward like a wave crashing into the youngest. J-Hope jumped in first, arms thrown wide, laughing and crying at the same time. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's arm and pulled him in even tighter. Taeyong wrapped both of them from behind. RM placed his hand gently on the back of Jungkook's head, a silent, I see you. Suga didn't even try to be cool anymore. He just smiled, soft and trembling. This wasn't choreography. This wasn't planned. This was real. Jungkook, overwhelmed, lifted the mic again, voice shaking, and looked at his hyungs. I missed this. I missed you. I wanted you to see me like this. Not just as Jungkook from BTS, but as someone who never forgot where he came from. The crowd went quiet again. That kind of quiet that only happens when the world is listening with its entire soul. He turned to the audience now, hand still gripping Jimin's arm. You know, I sing for ARMY every time. But tonight, I sang with BTS in my heart. The applause didn't stop. It couldn't. It became a wave of emotion, of history, of shared memories between artist and fan, between brothers, between a family that chose each other through music, sweat, sacrifice, and unconditional love. And then, another surprise. Jungkook handed the mic to Jean. There was a pause. Jean blinked, shocked. But Jungkook nodded. Encouraging, loving, trusting, and with a laugh and a sniffle, Jean raised the mic to his lips and said in a trembling voice, Well, since our magne just destroyed us with emotions, I guess I'll return the favor. Laughter and cheers rang out again, and just like that, the stage and the seats no longer mattered, because for the first time in a long time, BTS was standing together, not as global icons, not as performers, but as family, together again. And this reunion was just beginning. Jean held the microphone for a moment longer than expected. His fingers trembled slightly, just enough for the camera to catch. The stadium, once full of thunderous applause, had gone completely quiet. As if every fan instinctively knew, something important is about to be said, and they were right. He looked at Jungkook, not the stage, not the fans, not the cameras, just Jungkook. And then he began. You know, Jean started, his voice soft but steady. I've always joked around a lot. I tease, I make dumb faces, I try to be funny because that's how I protect myself. That's how I keep things light when they get too heavy. A small nervous laugh escaped his lips. But Jungkook didn't laugh. He just listened. Eyes locked on Jean, chest rising and falling, waiting. But tonight, Jean continued. I don't want to joke. I want to say something I never got to say to you, not properly. Not out loud. Not in front of the world. Jimin turned his head toward Jean slowly, sensing something different. who had been nodding calmly moments ago, now held his breath. And Jungkook? His eyes widened, as if a part of him knew what was coming but still wasn't prepared. When you first joined us, Jin said, his voice growing thicker. You were just a kid. Quiet.
Shy.
Always watching us. I remember thinking, we need to protect this one. He's so young, he could break easily. There were soft murmurs in the crowd. Armies held hands. Some already wiping tears. Jin's lips trembled now. But I was wrong. He turned toward the audience briefly, then back to Jungkook. Because over the years, I realized you weren't the one who needed protecting. We were. You were the one who held us together when we felt like falling apart. You were the one who stayed up the longest during practice, who smiled when the rest of us were too tired to speak, who carried burdens bigger than your age, and never once complained. He stopped for a moment. Tears now shimmered clearly in his eyes. And I never said thank you. Jungkook blinked, and the moment those words left Jin's mouth, his expression cracked, his jaw trembled. His eyes filled with tears in an instant. His head dipped slightly, the way someone does when they're trying desperately not to cry in front of people. But it was too late. Jin stepped forward now, not just speaking, but looking directly into Jungkook's soul. You were never just our magne, he said. You are our strength. And if I never get another chance to say this, I need to say it now. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. And I love you more than words will ever be able to explain. The crowd lost it. Cries and gasps echoed from every section. Even staff members backstage were seen wiping their eyes. Taeyoon looked down, his fingers over his lips. Overwhelmed. J-Hope covered his face entirely, sobbing uncontrollably. Jimin had his hand on Jungkook's back, gently patting, whispering something over and over. He means it. He means it. RM placed a hand on Jin's shoulder, whispering something only he could hear. Maybe thank you. Maybe you said it perfectly. Maybe just I know. And Suga, ever silent, simply nodded. A long, knowing nod. The kind you give when words would only cheapen the truth. Jungkook finally stepped forward, hugging Jin tightly. It wasn't brief. It wasn't polite. It was a full, trembling, I heard every word said, kind of hug. He whispered something back. The mic didn't catch it. But Jin's eyes closed the moment he heard it, as if the words hit straight to the heart. They pulled back, finally, and Jungkook, voice thick, breaking, turned to the audience. Thank you for letting me grow in front of you, for letting me fall, and letting me fly. The crowd cheered again. But it wasn't wild this time. The IT was soft, deep, full of respect, because this wasn't just another idol moment. This was real-life vulnerability being shown on the biggest stage in the world, that a confession that should have come years ago, but came exactly when it was meant to.